Adam Shar, 7 games. It is Tuesday, January 29th. Adam, how goes it, sir?
Pretty good. Pretty excited about this slate. I think it's actually a fun one. There's a ton of good plays, so you can be different. I'm pretty excited for it. How's your day
All right.
going?
Well, yeah, as am I. Let's jump into it so we give ourselves enough time as needed. Glad to have you with us, by the way, to our usual listeners, viewers, and anybody that's new here. We're glad to have you as well. Hopefully, you'll stick around. We'll take it up until 6 o'clock. And then, of course, you've got Live Before Lock with Eddie and Chris taking you up till 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The slate breakdown today, you've got 3 games at 7 Eastern, one at 7:30, one at 8, one at 8:30, and one at 10:30. So, Adam, the thing here is that, well, I was kind of hoping we didn't because I was almost certain he was going to sit anyway, but we've gotten the news on Kyle Kuzma already. And I was really hoping that I could just plug Beasley in over everyone that planned on playing Rondé Hollis Jefferson. But it looks like I'm not going to be, sneaky there at all. Anthony Davis is still out. Jared Dudley remains out. That is relevant. We'll talk about that in a little while. Ayton is still out. DeRozan's out. Kuzma, LeBron's still out. A lot of injuries, a lot of decent value that's opened up. Oh, and Julius Randle is also out.
Yeah, a lot of value, but a lot of it's like mid-range value too, where it's just players that should be able to outperform their salaries. But it at least makes it interesting from a roster construction standpoint, as opposed to those slates where it's just some $4,000 kind of must-play guy.
No question. And by value, I could be talking about someone that's 7K and
Right,
is
exactly.
really like Julius Randle to me on DraftKings before he was out at 78 with no Davis, and you could see that as perceived value, but it really just depends. It's not always just a punt. So yeah, good
Right.
clarification there. Let's get into it. We'll start with a real good one here. Washington and Cleveland in Cleveland. Wizards 7.5 point road favorites, 218 total. As we know, Cleveland, they're the worst defensive team in the league, and it's really not close. But they're also, one of the most sluggish teams in the league when it comes to pace, ahead of only the Memphis Grizzlies on the season. Terrible defensive team though, and it comes with their inability to shut down opposing 3-point shooters, where they are allowing the highest 3-point percentage in the league. They're allowing, unsurprisingly, the highest field goal percentage, the highest true shooting. In terms of free throw attempts, they're in the bottom 10. Like they've been trashed pretty much everywhere. But at the same time, now you've got some Washington guys whose prices have come up. I want to start with the Wizards here, and we'll start with Beal, and then get into some of these 6K guys that Josh and I had a long conversation about this morning. We'll see where we're at now that a bunch of news is broken throughout the afternoon.
Yeah, so I mean, Beal, of course, really like the spot for him going against a terrible defensive team, like you said. The issue is just that the shooting guard position actually has a pretty decent amount of players, especially high upside guys. With Drew Holiday similarly priced to Beal, actually a little bit cheaper on DraftKings, with James Harden in a great spot against New Orleans, with a lot of guys that we'll talk about. So I can't really make Beal a priority, even though I do love the spot. I love that he's going to play 38 to 40 minutes, assuming Cleveland stays in this game. So, I like him. I'm happy with whatever I get of him, but I don't expect him to be one of my highest owned guys.
Me neither. It's kind of felt that way for each of Beal's last few games. And if you didn't play him, it definitely didn't hurt you. Unless, of course, you faded him when he scored 93 fantasy points. That may not have ended that well. But that was a weekend. I don't even think I played that day.
Yeah.
The minutes are absolutely there. Satoransky's kind of interesting to me, though, because he's one of these guys where in tournaments, I actually understand the appeal. And I say that because Satoransky's floor is relatively low, but he's 6K flat. His ceiling, however, has been pretty impressive. He leads the team in assists and potential assists over the past, I think, 2-3 weeks. Rebounding numbers have been okay. He's doing enough as a scorer. And in terms of getting steals, Satoransky's got 2 or more steals in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of his last 8 games. That may seem like stuff that doesn't really matter much, but when you start adding up those counting stats, he becomes a lot more valuable from a ceiling standpoint. And now we've seen him cross 45 fantasy points in 3 of his last 7. So I do have some interest in Satoransky. I think Josh and I talked about in our initial crunches, he popped up like 15% or 12%, which I'm okay with. Outside of Beal, we talked about him, just got into some Satoransky here. What else are you doing, if anything, with the rest of the Washington Wizards?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I agree with you on Satoransky. Just playing huge minutes here. 36 to 38 minutes in competitive games. He's a good basketball player. He's not the same as John Wall. He's not this high usage guy that's going to
He's been
dominate
good,
shots.
though. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, but he contributes in other ways. Rebounding, assists. He passes a lot more. So still, gives you some decent upside and is still reasonably priced for the minutes that he's playing. So no problem there. We are waiting on what on the surface probably doesn't seem like important news here, but Jan Mahinmi and Sam Decker, both game time decisions here. Decker, I really don't care because I would just give his minutes to Troy Brown if he sits. But if Mahinmi sits, then you can more confidently give minutes to Thomas Bryant in a matchup against a front court where there's no real reason to think that he can't handle it defensively. And it would help to solidify the minutes for Jeff Green with more of his minutes coming at center as well. So if Jan Mahinmi sits, then it becomes more appealing for Thomas Bryant. It becomes more appealing for Jeff Green. If he's in, I think they're both viable tournament options. Their floor just gets a lot lower.
Right. I'm with you there. On the other side, unless there's anyone else you want to talk about with Washington, yes, no, maybe so.
Yeah, I mean, whatever Ariza and Porter I get to is fine. Still playing, Ariza playing monster minutes in a great matchup here. Porter somewhere between 32 and 35 minutes, normally in a good spot. So those guys are fine. It's just that they've gotten a little bit more expensive, whereas Bryant and Green are still more affordable.
Okay. I really feel like this whole team is, if you're single or 3 maxing, it's a little bit different here, but you're playing multiple lineups, many lineups, ending up with some of these guys is perfectly fine. It's not a fast up tempo spot, but it's still a very good matchup. And, they're all, I think, reasonably priced. Satoransky, I think at 6K is actually very reasonably priced. You're not getting him at a massive discount anymore, but it's not exactly a terrible spot either. So, yeah, I absolutely think he's a strong play there, and I'll have some of him. On the Cleveland side, said the same thing this morning. I mean, really, it's every day. If you're looking at them, it's similar players that really rely on scoring, whether it be Burks or Clarkson or Sexton or Hood. Just so similar in that their floors are so incredibly low. And how high are the ceilings of these guys when all of them are healthy?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem is that you're talking about players who, with this team mostly healthy now, are not playing a lot of minutes for the most part. They're also not good players on a per minute basis. So it's, kind of two things working against them. Then you have to keep in mind that this Washington team is not playing as fast as they were, and they are playing much better defensively than they were. So it's not even the same really appealing spot that it was before. I think if you want to look at, Chetty, who's played 38 minutes in each of his last 2 games, that's fine. It's still certainly not a priority for me on the slate, nor close to it. But him and Zizic would be like the only 2 guys that I really have any interest in from Washington. I guess 4K Rodney Hood would be okay as well, but again, just not really appealing. It's once again just a slate where Cleveland's going to be a bunch of guys that I really have very little exposure to.
Yeah, when it comes to someone like Chetty, the only thing with him, the only positive with Chetty is that, and you mentioned it, 39 minutes in back-to-back games. Like, if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't even be really discussing him. I mean,
right. And the price tag's already come up some.
Right, exactly. On a per minute basis, this guy, he's just not productive. It's funny too, you look back at the beginning of the season. Remember he had like 2 huge games to start off the season. And then really just as expected, there's no reason you would expect him to sustain that. Even with Kevin Love out, he's a 0.74 fantasy point per minute guy on the year. If you're getting that across 37 or 39 minutes, well, then we can have a conversation. But really, you're just hoping that he plays 38, 39 minutes and just is okay, because usually when you're out there that long, you will stumble into at least decent numbers, hopefully.
Right.
But it's still tough. Do
Yeah,
you
and
have anything?
on a slate like this with so many good plays, it's just the opportunity cost is still enormous.
Right, exactly. If Chetty was 4K, 4,200, I really wouldn't. I wouldn't be against it at all. Um, how would you rank? Well, we didn't even talk about any of them yet, J Dog. So wait till we do. Wait till we get a little further in and re-ask, and I will happily answer that. But we haven't even gotten into any of them, so it would be a little ridiculous to rank them already. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. But we will move to Orlando and Oklahoma City. We've got OKC 4-point road favorites, a 222 total. We can kick it off with the road or the home team here, and then we will get into some Westbrook and Paul George talk. Vooch is really expensive, and like yeah, I understand pivoting away from popular plays, but are you willing to go Vooch against Adams and OKC over Embiid, who on DraftKings is only 10-2 and faces the Lakers?
Right, that's the issue. Obviously you're going to get lower ownership on Vooch, and at least
But
you'll
for good
probably get
reason.
similar minutes from him and Embiid. It's not like when we were talking about him and Towns, and it gets really tough to get there. But again, it is a tougher matchup, and Embiid is averaging 1.7 fantasy points per minute over the last month. He's just as good as Vooch has been. Embiid is still a much more productive player on a permanent basis. So again, you would just need massive ownership differences for me to want to go to Vooch over Embiid.
And to be fair, or at least to be clear, going forward, Vooch has seen his minutes increase recently, which is encouraging, even if it's just a few minutes per game. But he's averaging 33 minutes per game over his last 10. And if you look back, since the beginning of the season, Vooch was not averaging anywhere close to that. Really, actually, he was averaging 30 minutes per game. An extra 3 or 4 minutes per game from Vooch is really, really favorable most nights, especially now that his salary is up that high. But Embiid is just too cheap at that price in a spectacular matchup, and I just don't see the leverage there. Do you see anybody else here that you like? We can talk Aaron Gordon, who gets a nice pace-up spot. OKC playing at a very much an elevated pace, especially over the last month, leading the league. And while they do have a solid defense, this is a team that will give up points just by the nature of the way they play.
Yeah, I like Aaron Gordon here. Maybe he goes a little bit overlooked because there's some really obvious power forward plays on the slate. 40 and 39 minutes in his like you said, it's a huge pace-up spot for Orlando, and Gordon is just an absolute, athletic freak. Like when you get him in pace-up spots, it's pretty appealing. Basically a fantasy point per minute guy playing those kinds of minutes in a pace-up spot, and also should see the opportunity for plenty of defensive stats because he will probably see plenty of time on Paul George in this game. There's a chance you see him defend Westbrook to some extent. We've seen Orlando in the past use him on basically whoever the primary ball handler is at times. So he should be able to pick up some steals and blocks potentially. I think that he's a pretty good play here, and normally he's someone that I don't really roster that often.
You know what makes me feel like an asshole?
What's that?
I hear someone shoveling snow. I look outside. It's my girl. I'm like, yeah, and I'm up here. What pisses me off though is I'll be like, you could have waited till I was done, right? It's like, yeah, well, I just wanted to get it done. And then
Right.
then there will be some complaining that I didn't do it.
Right.
It always happens that way. Stay single forever, dude.
I'm doing my best.
You got it made, bro. I mean, to be fair, there are some benefits. Don't get me wrong. But then, yeah, I'm sure something will happen. It's like 1 inch of snow, though. Who cares, right? But anything else for Orlando that stands out to you? I will say for me, there really isn't. I know Evan Fournier is inexpensive. Maybe you get small exposure to him, and if you're MMEing. But aside from that, I'm just having trouble getting anywhere, especially with, and you pointed this out right at the top of the show, the mid-range value in that 5, 6, even 7K range is kind of too plentiful for me to say, yeah, I really love Evan Fournier here. Maybe you're in a different position than I am.
No, same spot. And we've actually seen his minutes come down a little bit, whereas Gordon's playing a ton. Jonathan Simmons has reemerged in this rotation, and we've seen Fournier go from playing 36 to 38 minutes a night to 30 to 32, and that's coincided with his price tag coming up. So I don't really see it.
Anyone else for Orlando, or can we move this over to OKC?
No, we can go to OKC.
So Russell Westbrook is also, it's like we've tried before to people you're making lineups with like James Harden when he was 12-5 and Anthony Davis at 11-9, and people did it. They tried it. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Making lineups, if you are looking to do this with Westbrook and Embiid, is not difficult at all. And Westbrook, Josh said Westbrook's the worst. I love it. He said Westbrook is the worst shooter ever. Bold
All right.
statement, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely worse than Lonzo.
But he is a bad. Well,
I,
what
I,
if
I'm, ta-
Lonzo?
I'm
What
taking
if
wins where I can get
Lonzo?
them.
What if Lonzo? Yeah, right. What if Lonzo was shooting 20 times a game though?
He'd get more practice in. He'd be better.
Josh is away from his computer right now because he definitely would have chimed in.
Yeah,
I'm
no
here.
question.
I'm just
Oh,
letting
there
you
he
guys
is.
know.
There he is.
He's the worst shooter of people that shoot.
I do know. I know exactly. Like most
Yeah.
guys that shoot 20 times a game need to be better shooters to shoot 20 times a game. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, like I'm not including like Will Purdue and shit in this stuff.
Right. Or guys that were taking 20 shots a game all around the basket, like a Shaq. Like, it's different, right? You're talking a shooter, not a scorer, because Westbrook's a phenomenal scorer. You're talking shooter.
Right.
Might still be a stretch, but I don't really care whether he is or isn't a good shooter, which he isn't, because he just does everything else. He leads the team, the entire team, in rebounding, assists, and maybe not scoring. Probably is Paul George. Yeah, I think it's Paul George, but it doesn't matter. He just does so much, and he's 10-7. Where are you getting, if anybody, when it comes to OKC in this matchup against Orlando, which I expect to stay close?
Yeah, not a ton for me here, just because of the positions that these guys play. You have Westbrook, who I think is perfectly fine, but he's more expensive than Ben Simmons, who's very reasonably priced on both DraftKings and FanDuel. And then it's a pretty deep mid-range at point guard with guys like Rondo. We talked about Satoransky. There's an abundance of other guys there that we'll talk about, that not necessarily priorities on this slate, but just a lot of guys that a couple of them probably will have good games. So it makes it tough to get up to Westbrook. And then, Paul George, you have on DraftKings with the multi-position eligibility, there's a ton of guys that you can get to. But even on FanDuel, where the position is not quite as strong, you still have Giannis on the slate. You have Brandon Ingram, Rudy Gay, Michael Beasley, all at the position. So there's still some very strong, mid-range and value options. It's just tough for me to pay up for either of these guys when I would rather, prioritize Embiid as far as someone to pay up for.
Yeah, and to be clear, Embiid is my top high-end play, but I think we made that clear earlier in the show. I think your point is a very salient point on Paul George and Westbrook. I still think Westbrook's relatively easy to get to because, like with Ben Simmons, he has small forward eligibility. Speaking specifically on DraftKings, a lot of these guys are still easy to get to at other positions, whether it be shooting guard, utility. And I haven't handmade any lineups yet, but, hold on a second. Kawhisenberg says, think you're missing the fact that Josh is saying literally Russ is the worst three-point shooter in NBA history based on some minimum number of attempts. I mean, if that's true, then that's amazing. Like, incredible. That's insane. But but again, you think about that, it doesn't even matter. Like, it's kind of like when you look at somebody like name a guy that hits a ton of home runs and strikes out an incredible amount.
Giancarlo Stanton.
Giancarlo Stanton. Yeah, or Aaron Judge, right? He's like an Aaron Judge of basketball because no matter how many times you miss, when you do things good, it outweighs the negative, and he just does so much else. Like when Giancarlo Stanton isn't striking out, he's probably hitting a home run. And when Westbrook isn't missing shots, he's racking up double-digit rebounds and assists. So I still like him here quite a bit. I got a decent amount in the initial crunches because I feel like the price points where he's priced at, to me, is still very reasonable. If he was up around 11 or more than that, I'd be looking at this differently. But yeah, I do still like Westbrook here.
Yeah. I haven't crunched DraftKings yet. I crunched 300 FanDuel lineups before the show and got 6% Westbrook.
Right. Okay. Well, I think Westbrook. I think it's a lot different on fan. Maybe not. Maybe you don't get any on DraftKings, but and by any I mean not a lot. But Westbrook, 11-9 on FanDuel. Embiid's 10-6, Embiid's 10-2 on DraftKings, Westbrook's 10-6, and a lot of these value guys have MPE, and you can play them elsewhere. So I didn't have a lot of trouble getting him in there. Be curious to see what you get when you do run the DraftKings crunches. We'll see. I came up with 36% Westbrook in my initial crunch right now. I just ran another one right now. So that's DraftKings. Anything else for this game?
No, not for me.
All right, let's talk about Detroit and Milwaukee. We'll start to get to the good games after this, I promise. Somehow we've spent 20 minutes on it already. Milwaukee, 7.5-point road favorites, 216.5 total. How a lot of times we talked about, oh yeah, if Brook Lopez, pulls Drummond away from the rim and this and that. I went back and looked at it. So Drummond hasn't lost minutes because of Brook Lopez. However, he has 4 games this season where he hasn't reached double-digit rebounds. 2 of them have come against Milwaukee. So 2 of his 4 games where he hasn't reached double-digit rebounds. He had one against Philly, but he played 21 minutes in a blowout, and he got 9. So I don't include that because that's not fair. Two of the 4 have come against Milwaukee, and you have to ask, is he getting pulled away from the rim? How often is that happening? Because he still played 30, 34, and 30 minutes against them, foul trouble in 2. It's an interesting concept, and I'd be curious to see how that affects him. On the other hand, Brook Lopez had 2 terrible games and then 1 great game against Detroit.
Yeah, and if you go and I didn't rewatch it today, but I remember from rewatching it prior to their last game, or watching some of it at least, that it's not like it's every possession Drummond's out there with Lopez, but there are certainly times that he's chasing, out to the 3-point line and closing out on Lopez. So you would expect it to take away rebound opportunities. You would still, Drummond's still a great rebounder. He's going to get a lot of
Best
the opportunities. Right. He's going to grab a lot of the ones that he's around for. So he's still going to get his. It's just that, instead of getting like 20, maybe he gets 14 or something.
Right. And from an opportunity cost standpoint, you're trying to maximize what we can get.
Right. And so I think it's a valid point in that it's not an ideal matchup because he's not going to be under the rim every single time a ball goes up like he normally is. So, that's not great. And then also it's obviously a really, really, really deep center position today. So I don't really see myself getting to much Drummond. I don't see myself getting to a whole lot of Blake either. With Drummond back, you see a pretty sizable rebounding hit for Griffin normally. Now I think maybe he gets a few more opportunities today because of what we just discussed with Drummond, but still not really loving him. I would rather play Blake than Drummond, but I doubt that I get to a whole lot of either one.
Yep. And Blake is still not priced to where he was without Drummond, obviously, but 93 on DraftKings, that's a bit steep for me, Adam. 10K on FanDuel is a lot steep for me. I just can't get there. And this whole team, Reggie if we hadn't gotten much news, I would have been willing to consider Reggie Jackson. I still don't think he's the worst play, to be honest with you. He played 35 minutes last game, which is very interesting. Like if Jackson was getting 35 minutes a night, I'd have interest in him a whole lot more at 4,800. It's just very hard to say. And then Ish Smith has already been ruled out. So I do think that the minutes are going to be there. Reggie Bullock also not expected to play. But is there anything you're doing with the rest of this Pistons team?
Yeah, I think Jackson's fine at the price tag. It'll come down to ownership for me. I don't think he's such a great play that you need to roster him at high ownership in tournaments all that frequently.
No, of course
but
not.
Right, but if it drops, as more value opens up, then I think that, it's fine. He played 35 last game, like you said. He played 35 minutes 4 or 5 games ago. And then, in the time in between, we had a game where he played 29 minutes with 4 fouls. He played 23 minutes in a blowout. He played 30 minutes in a close game, and then he played 35 minutes again. So somewhere between 30 and 35 seems reasonable. I actually had him at 30 before the show. I'll probably bump it up to 32. So yeah, I think he's perfectly fine at his price tag. It's still Reggie Jackson. He still can find plenty of ways to suck, but he's fine.
He can find a lot of ways to suck. And it's not a premier matchup, but
no.
4,800, you're getting him cheap. I have him at 33 minutes. That might be a little bit steep. But if he plays 33 minutes, Reggie Jackson is probably fine at 4,800. Put it that way.
Right.
Yeah, that's all there is to it. 51 on FanDuel is fine, but opportunity cost when we get into some of these other players could get in the way, just in terms of which guys you want in terms of value. Anybody you have any interest in throwaway guys on FanDuel with Reggie Bullock out, or do you want to talk Milwaukee here?
Yeah, Luke Kennard and Stanley Johnson are both fine, especially on FanDuel. I haven't seen a starting lineup yet. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Johnson starting and not Kennard, just because it would be a weird – Milwaukee's just such a long team that it would be weird to have the smaller starting lineup for Detroit. But either way, I expect that you see, around 26 for Luke Kennard, maybe up to like 24 for Stanley Johnson. Neither one's a great play, but they're good enough that you can drop them on FanDuel.
Right. Yeah, on DraftKings, I just simply don't think you need to get there, even with Reggie Bullock not expected to play. It is worth noting, though, that Reggie Bullock's minutes have been through the roof, so he's getting a lot of minutes. He was just officially listed out, so maybe we'll get some news. Malcolm Brogdon also listed out. So thank you to the basketball gods for the very appropriate timing. Let's talk about the Malcolm Brogdon-less Bucks.
All right, so
I got there before you, but don't impede my status. I appreciate it, but there's a delay, but I promise. I mentioned that before you hit me up. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Brogdon being out should open up more minutes for Sterling Brown, George Hill. I don't think it really does a ton in the way of impacting DFS. It probably makes Eric Bledsoe's minutes a little bit more secure.
You don't want to play Sterling Brown?
I do not. But don't. I hate when we say that, because now he's going to play like 40 minutes.
Yeah. Brad.
Yeah, so Bledsoe, I think I'll give a couple more minutes to. I had him at 30. I'll go ahead and bump him to like 32. Probably bump Hill to like 24, and then you should see minutes go to whatever wing is available. I think DiVincenzo is still out, so it would probably be like Connaughton.
I don't think it makes a big difference for any of the guys that, like, any of these household DFS names, like the Bledsoes and the Middletons and stuff. I just don't.
The Bucks are a team where there's like 4 guys that we roster, and then the rest of them, it doesn't matter.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that Giannis is a really good play on either site, but especially FanDuel, where you do have to roster the 2 small forwards, and Paul George is really expensive. I'd rather roster Giannis there. He's averaged 1.76 fantasy points per minute over the last month. That's better than I think anyone except James Harden. It's just we still don't really roster him that often, because he was almost always on a slate with Harden, with Paul out, or with Anthony Davis, with that whole team out. Not quite the case tonight. Not a great matchup against Detroit, but not a terrible one either. And really, the thing that's hurt Giannis the most this year from a DFS standpoint has been that the Bucks are so good. They just blow teams out so frequently that you don't see a lot of minutes out of Giannis. But only 7-point favorites. It's a road game at Detroit. Hopefully Detroit can hang around in this one enough that we get 35 or 36 minutes from Giannis, which would make him a really, really good play, I think.
Okay. By the way, Sterling Brown's not expected to play either, but again, you get some extra from Connaughton or from Tony Snell. Like, they still have enough bodies to soak those minutes up, where I don't personally think it makes a huge difference here. George Hill can, play 5 additional minutes.
George Hill becomes kind of an interesting value play if you're playing a lot lineup.
20, right. If you get potentially like 28 minutes from him at a free cost, put it this way, if there were anybody that I would be willing to say, okay, this could affect him nicely, he's cheap enough, George Hill would be the guy, but it's still a tertiary type play there.
Right.
So in a vacuum, do you like on DraftKings, because they're $100 apart, I'm sure you know where I'm going here, Giannis Antetokounmpo or Russell Westbrook? Just in a
I
vacuum.
yeah, Giannis.
Okay. Yeah,
He I mean,
Westbrook for me.
I think that they play similar minutes. You know, like Westbrook could play a couple more. Giannis almost never plays 38, but Westbrook averages like 1.5 fantasy points per minute. Giannis averages like 1.7. So it's Giannis for me.
Okay. For what it's worth, and I say it all the time when I reference this, I usually don't look at this, but Giannis has really struggled against the Pistons throughout the entirety of his career. Maybe he snaps that today. We had a question. Is playing Giannis and Bledsoe or Middleton in the same lineup all right with us? You
I
could. I
don't
just don't love it at
Yeah, I
all.
mean, I don't love it just because I think there's spots that I like better, and allocating that much money to the Bucks here isn't something I really love. Especially, it always scares me doing that because the Bucks are so good. If Giannis goes out there and has the game you're hoping he has and gives you like 70 fantasy points, and Bledsoe somehow gets like 50, like how is that happening? Because the Bucks are a really good team, and it's pretty
Right.
unlikely they're letting Detroit score like 120 points or something.
If I'm doing it, I would rather go Giannis and Middleton and just take those savings. I know it's not a ton, but I'll take $600 discount on Middleton over Bledsoe, and Bledsoe's at the guard positions too. So I don't love it. I just don't think it's necessary,
Yeah.
but you could do worse, sure.
Someone in chat asked if I like Giannis more because Brogdon's out. That it has no impact for me.
I don't think Giannis. I would say this: if you're asking, like, do I play Giannis and Middleton together, Giannis and Bledsoe? If you're just asking that, okay, maybe they'll both have good games. But if you're asking that because of the Brogdon news, I would just say don't overvalue that too much. Like these three guys, you're going to throw another guy in the lineup. Brogdon's usage is higher than whoever is going to enter, but it's not significant enough to where you really have enough to be distributed throughout where it benefits multiple players enough to make them significantly better options.
Right.
All right. Anything else on Brolo? Anything before we move on to the next one?
No, I mean, if this is the game where Brolo torches Drummond, then
So be it, right?
cool. I'm not gonna have him.
Actually, I believe last time he did. So maybe we got that out of the way.
Well, as I say that, I'm sure he'll end up in like one out of like my 600 lineups, and it'll be the one that wins, and everyone will get mad. But I don't plan on having much Brolo.
So the last time he faced Detroit that I played him, he had 3 real points. And
Yeah, I remember that.
And he was like 4K. So it
Yeah.
actually didn't hurt me because he had 5 blocks and somehow ended with like 27 fantasy points. So it didn't kill you. And then he had 25 real points the next time, 7 for 10 from 12. And Drummond had a really rough game. But Brolo's peripherals are just god awful. And it's tough. If he's not scoring or blocking 5 shots, you're going to have a long night. Brooklyn and Chicago. Let's get into this for a minute here. The Brooklyn Nets 6.5-point home favorites, 220 total. They really are a decent basketball team. They're not great, but they're better than many expected and been dealing with injuries. But this was a team that had a good amount of depth. So Travion Graham is in. He was out yesterday. Mind you, they are playing their second of a back-to-back. Jared Dudley remains out. And of course, the other players who we already know are out, Crabbe, Levert, Dinwiddie, they're all sidelined as well. What do you make of somebody like Rondae Hollis-Jefferson? Josh and I had a long discussion about this earlier today. We came to the same conclusion, but I would like to get your take on it. What do you think of Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, who is expected to be around 30% owned?
I don't think I'll be there for a couple of reasons. For one, with Trevion Graham being back, that's obviously a guy who's been playing 26 to 28 minutes back in the rotation. Theo Pinson's been playing well and getting closing minutes. So I don't think he just disappears. Like I think you can still get some minutes from him. And it's a back-to-back. And we're talking about Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, who Kenny Atkinson has really been trying not to play all season long. So he played 27 minutes last night. I have a hard time seeing him getting more than that under these conditions. And I think it's more likely that he drops back down to like 24 minutes. It's obviously a really nice spot. It's a really nice price tag. I'm fine getting to him, but I would be pretty surprised if I get to 30% Hollis-Jefferson.
Right. And the second leg of a back-to-back for somebody like Hollis-Jefferson that's been dealing with a variety of ailments all season long and just recently returned from another one doesn't exactly encourage me much either. Earlier today, we had him projected for like the second highest ownership on the slate, and then we got some news. The Kyle Kuzma news, maybe the Randall news affected it. We got a bunch of stuff. Even at 29, though, like is he going to be mega chalk? No, but that's still pretty popular for somebody like him. Hell, I had said earlier that I'd rather just go with like an Ed Davis, hoping that no one would play him. But I don't even think you really need to go there either. It's just with Hollis Jefferson, there are so many ways it can go wrong. Like there's so many ways, whether he doesn't play or he does play and he just isn't good. And now, as you mentioned, you get Travion Graham back. The biggest thing here is that Hollis Jefferson is very cheap. But aside from that, he's not a reliable player, even remotely. Once in a while, he has a real big game, and then he just disappears. So, if you end up with someone, if you wanted to, I think in cash, if you want, but even so, he still carries a lot of risk tonight.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like it's a great matchup, but
of course,
there are just so many plays on this slate that like if Hollis Jefferson goes out there and is the reason I can't win a tournament, then I will.
Tony Snell's starting for Brogdon, by the way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Give him like 22 minutes or something.
Maybe
more.
Like 24.
Yeah, I haven't looked. I'm just guessing.
It doesn't matter.
It really does. It sounds about right. He'll hit like 1 or 2 threes on 5 attempts, and that'll be his day.
He can actually play more than that, though. I think last time he started, I'm looking now, but I think last time he started, he played like 30 plus.
Okay. Still Tony.
Still doesn't matter. Just
right.
Saying.
Do you have any interest elsewhere on Brooklyn?
I mean, it's a great matchup. So if you're playing a lot of lineups, then sure. Russell obviously is in a great spot. Ed Davis and Jared Allen both in great spots. One of them probably has a good game. But if you're single entering and trying to really narrow down your player pool, it's tough to prioritize any of these guys.
Yeah, and that's how I feel. There's nobody that I can get to with any confidence, really. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this to you. Brooklyn's playing at a top 8 pace since the start of January, which is a lot different than what we were seeing earlier in the season where they were bottom 10 in pace for the first 2.5 months.
Yeah, no question. Tony Snell, 30 or 29 minutes the last time he started, actually was against Detroit, actually scored 26 DraftKings points. So do with that whatever.
So he's going to do it again, right? All right. Chicago. Man, the whole Portis Rolo situation's wild. I mean, they're between the two of them, you're getting between 44 and like 46 minutes at center each night. It's just Portis. So Lopez starts against Atlanta. Doesn't start the second half. Portis does. Plays 33 minutes. Portis starts against the Clippers. He was a very good play, had perfectly fine numbers, even though he had 0 peripherals outside of those rebounds. 34 minutes the very next game. And then against Cleveland 2 days later, Rolo starts, plays 26 minutes, has a good game, and Portis plays 19 minutes off the bench and is virtually invisible. It's ridiculous what Jim Boylan's doing right now, because if Portis, even if he wasn't starting, if I had any confidence that he could see around 28, 29 minutes against this Brooklyn front court, I would have a lot of interest. But how do we gauge what we're going to see here in the front court? I'm having a very tough time doing so.
Yeah, I have absolutely no idea. If we get news that he's starting, then project him for like 32 minutes. If we get that Lopez is starting, it's still tough because 2 starts ago, like you said, Lopez still played like 15 minutes and Portis played a ton. Last game, that didn't happen. So the way I'm approaching it is to project them both for like 26 minutes and cap their exposure and obviously not play them together, similar to what I've talked about doing with Whiteside and Bam before. I do think that if you're playing a lot of lineups, it makes more sense to take the risk on FanDuel than DraftKings because the price tag's more appealing. Like DraftKings at 6,400, first you need to get the minutes to go your way. Then you need to get him to actually outproduce a pretty expensive price tag. On FanDuel, it's a little bit easier. So, yeah, I mean, it's the type of guy where if you're single entering, you don't have him because his minute, he could literally just be useless. But if you're playing a lot of lineups, he should be, very, very low owned. And he's the kind of guy where if everything breaks your way, he's productive enough on a permanent basis to be a very helpful player.
Yeah, it's funny that Portis's projected ownership on FanDuel has come down throughout the day, probably because of the injury news. But 7% projected ownership on a guy like Portis that can have some really solid games. 5,700 on DraftKings or FanDuel is really friendly. But it comes, there's a lot of inherent risk there, and just know that. Like Adam just said it, I just said it. We really don't know what the minutes. We'd be lying if we said we had any idea what the playing time was going to look like when it comes to Boylan, dishing out minutes for this front court. So
Yeah, I mean
well, for the centers.
the only thing I can contribute as far as trying to guess what they're going to do is that Brooklyn's front court is small enough that Portis can match up fine, but that shouldn't have been an issue against Cleveland's front court either. So I think that Boylan's definition of match up fine and mine are probably different.
Right. Anything for Chicago that interests you, though?
Yeah, the other three main guys, Chris Dunn, Zach LaVine, and Markkanen, all playing big minutes. Dunn at 3,400, or not at 3,400. Dunn played about 34 minutes last game. He's 6,700 on DraftKings. I think 7,200 on FanDuel. He's one of those mid-range point guards where I was saying, he's not a priority, but he certainly has plenty of upside at that price point. It's a perfectly fine matchup for him. Lauri Markkanen, I like because, played 38 minutes last game, gets a couple of minutes at center. It's just a nice matchup against this Brooklyn front court in general. So I like both of those guys. LaVine would be my third option out of that group. And then on FanDuel, where you can drop someone, Wayne Selden at 3,800, I think is fine.
If I were to rank the three of them, for me, it's Markkanen, Dunn, LaVine.
Same here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think Markkanen 6,600 is a really nice price point on DraftKings. 72 on FanDuel, I'm fine with it. But I really like. I mean, of all the uncertainty in this front court, there's not really much uncertainty with Markkanen. If the game's close, he's going to get very solid minutes, and he's going to see plenty of opportunities. And the guy's doing a really solid job of hauling in some rebounds as well. So I like him. All right, Houston and New Orleans. No Julius Randle, obviously no Anthony Davis, who was just moments ago, the report fined $50,000. Sweet job, guy. And not that it matters to him, but still, no one wants to lose money. No him, no Davis, no Randall, no Mirotic, no Etuan Moore. They are the Houston Rockets are 11.5 point favorites. You've got a 233.5 total here. It has actually come up throughout the day. Earlier in the day, the Lakers Philly was the highest. This is the highest now by pretty wide margin. 233.5 total, Adam. Let's start with New Orleans and just break this team down the best we can, because there are a lot of moving parts here. And guys like Drew Holiday and, yes, believe it or not, Jahlil Okafor are going to see quite a heavy workload tonight.
Yeah, so this is very similar to a couple of games ago when we had New Orleans at Oklahoma City. There's a really good chance this game blows out, but there's also just so much upside to be had in this game, because if it doesn't blow out, you know exactly where the production is coming from. Houston is not a good team defensively. Drew Holiday should be the focal point of this offense. He's played about like 250 minutes since last season without any of Cousins or Randall or Davis or Mirotic on the floor, and he's averaged about 1.2 fantasy points per minute with a 32% usage rate, 33% assist percentage. We saw him, have the monster game against Oklahoma City. He's capable of going out and just dominating any given game, and I think the price tag, especially on DraftKings, but even on FanDuel, is very affordable given the role and the minutes he should play here if this game stays competitive. You have Jahlil Okafor, who you mentioned, should play, 36 minutes here. And it's a nice spot for him. For one, we've seen Houston just get torn up by opposing centers since Capella went down. And for two, part of the reason that Okafor has been so limited in the NBA is that his offensive game has never really evolved beyond posting guys up and just trying to bully defenders around the basket. That doesn't really work that well in the NBA, but Kenneth Faried's about 3 inches shorter and 50 pounds lighter than Okafor is. If it's going to work, it would be on someone like that where he has, a huge size advantage. So, he's obviously a good play. But then you even get to guys like Elfrid Payton, who has lost closing minutes at times this season, but that shouldn't be an issue tonight if the game's competitive because they're so short on bodies. And should play 32 to 34 minutes as long as the game's competitive. You have Darius Miller, who should play a boatload of minutes and is basically just a three-point shooter, but should get plenty of opportunities here. There's just a lot of high upside guys on this Pelicans team for their price tags.
Agreed. I don't really need to say much more there because we kind of said it this morning. You're saying it again now for anyone that wasn't able to tune into the strategy show this morning. And I'm assuming that it was in your deep dive article as well, which, by the way, you can find on awesomemode.com along with all of our other content, some free, some behind the paywall. And if you'd like, you can head over to awesemo.com after the show. You could do it right now. You could do it whenever you'd like. And click join now. If you select the plan, you get 50% off, half off your first month of subscription at awesemo.com. All you have to do after you select your plan is put in your info. Takes a second. Click on the coupon code, put in Deeper Dive, one word, Deeper Dive, and check out, and you get half off, 50% off your first month of content at awesemo.com. Hopefully we'll get to see you over there. All ownership projections, all of our articles, all of our PGA content projections, ownership. Alex Baker, Awesemo, you know him. All of his stuff, his rankings, the lineup builder, and so much more that I don't have time to get to because we only have 10 minutes left. But the code is Deeper Dive, 50% off your first month. We'll see you there. So yeah, I like all of them. Okafor, I don't know. Like Randall's like a serious bully ball player. Okafor to some extent, but really he just lives around the basket and has no range at all. But you're right, against a guy like Farid. Farid's defense is best on transition and when you're in motion, right? When he can chase you down. Like if Farid has 3 blocks in a game, I would almost bet that or averages a block a game. I bet you that most of them are chase down blocks and not, defending a post up. You know what I mean? And that's really not how you expect Okafor to do the bulk of his damage. It is a spot where he should be okay here. But I don't think Farid's an awful play either. The minutes have continued to trend up. He's basically a, slightly less talented version of Clint Capella. He's doing exactly what they need him to do in Houston. He really is. He's rebounding, defending. He is just high energy. He's scoring enough. He's even getting to the line at times. What are your thoughts on Kenneth Faried on the opposite end? $6,300 on DraftKings, where Okafor is on DraftKings, where Okafor is $6,100, and Faried on FanDuel is $7,400, where Okafor is $7,200.
Yeah, I mean, I love both of them. I have Okafor projected for like a half point more than Farid, but really great spot for both. And this is a really appealing game stack game too, because like I mentioned with New Orleans, where we know where the production's coming from, we know where it's coming from with Houston too. It's Harden, it's Farid, and then to a lesser extent, it's guys like Paul, who's expected to play around 30 minutes tonight, and Eric Gordon, who should play a bunch of minutes in a really nice spot. So for both of these teams, it's just a handful of guys that the production comes from. So if you do get a shootout that stays competitive, it's not like you have to guess right on which guys are scoring. You know who it is.
Right.
So that makes it a really appealing game stack environment. But as an individual play, James Harden, I think, is still a really good play. Paul being back obviously hurts his per minute production, but he should still play about half of his minutes without Chris Paul, which is obviously nice. It's a great matchup against New Orleans. And on FanDuel, his price tag has started to come back down. So I like Harden quite a bit. Like I like him more on FanDuel, but I think he's a good play on either site. Farid, I love on both sites. Eric Gordon, I like quite a bit. And then Chris Paul, there's at least some upside, but it's kind of similar to DeMarcus Cousins in that if he's going to play 28 to 30 minutes, it's still kind of limited how much he can actually do.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just not really about Eric Gordon when this team is healthy with Paul and Harden. I get that he's not super expensive. I also understand that he's going to see the minutes. Okay, there's no argument for me there. It's more so just that in a spot like this, even with the minutes, I still see Eric Gordon's ceiling being pretty low, being that now all of his minutes are going to come with either Paul or Harden on the court. So,
yeah, I mean, I have him at like 30 DraftKings points at 5K.
Right. Okay. So, right. That's pretty much where I'm at too. I just don't think this is like, I'd almost say he's a better cash game play than a tournament play because I don't really see a high ceiling given now that even if Paul plays 28 minutes tonight, that's still enough to hurt him. Whereas with Kenneth Faried, Chris Paul being in the lineup really shouldn't make a difference. You want to move to this next one? We've got 2 to go, about 7 minutes here.
Yeah, let's go.
And of course, Live Before Lock, Chris and Eddie coming up next from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern time. Stick around for that. We've got Phoenix and San Antonio. No DeMar DeRozan, 13-point favorites are the San Antonio Spurs, 226 total here in San Antonio. I will let you go ahead. I want to get to the Lakers game and Philly game and get enough time there. So I'll go ahead and let you run with this one.
Yeah, so I mean, Aldridge, clearly one of the top plays on the slate. This is another game where there's significant blowout risk, but you know where it's coming from for San Antonio, and if it does stay close, then it's even better. Aldridge averaging almost 1.5 fantasy points per minute without DeRozan this year. If you put Rudy Gay on the floor, it's still 1.35 fantasy points per minute. Aldridge should play 34 to 36 if it's competitive. If it's not, then he plays less, but he probably still produced really well. So Aldridge, definitely a core play for me. Not that that's surprising for anyone. Rudy Gay, I think, is a good play as well. Was shortchanged a little bit when they blew out the Wizards last game. Only played 26 minutes. Should get 28 to 30 if it's competitive. Averages about 1.1 fantasy points per minute alongside Aldridge without DeRozan. So at a small forward position that's not that strong, I think Gay is a pretty solid option. And then in tournaments, I don't mind rotating between guys like Forbes and Derek White, Marco Bellinelli. Like any of those guys can do well in this matchup, but they're not priorities for me. On the other side, Richaun Holmes.
Wait, before you hold on, before you do that, is there anybody here on San Antonio that you have more than 20% of?
LaMarcus Aldridge. Aldridge, no question, and Rudy Gay probably.
Okay, and Aldridge on FanDuel and DraftKings, because I think it's a little different on DraftKings, Adam, where Aldridge is 8,700, and you have so much MPE, where on FanDuel he's 88, and basically not that much more expensive than guys like Fareed and Markkanen, relatively speaking.
I mean, I haven't crunched DraftKings, but I haven't projected for like 54 fantasy points, so I think I'll get a lot.
Oh, well, that will do it. Never mind. Okay, Phoenix, go ahead.
So the Phoenix side, Richaun Holmes, obviously going to be one of the most popular plays on the slate, I would think. Getting the start, coming off a really good game against the Lakers. He's a very good point per minute producer, about 1.12 fantasy points per minute with or without Devin Booker on the floor. It's not a particularly difficult matchup for him individually against whatever combination of Pau Gasol and LaMarcus Aldridge he sees. He's young enough to where I could see him getting minutes in a blowout anyway, so I'm not really that concerned about that. So I like Holmes. I like Booker to some extent. Obviously the opportunities should be there for him, but there's also just not much else for this Spurs defense to focus on. They're a good team. They're obviously a great coach team. So I think that you could see a very inefficient Booker. He'll get the shots up. He'll have the opportunities, but it does scare me a little bit going to him.
And the only the great thing about Holmes is he's only expected to be 58% owned on FanDuel and 54% on DraftKings. Dude, that's a lot.
Yeah. I also have him on DraftKings. I have him in 30 minutes with 32 fantasy points. So, and I think he could play more than that.
I think Kelly Oubre off the bench is also an interesting option here. He's going to play in a blowout, and I feel pretty confident in that. And he gets minutes staggered with Devin Booker, so I'm not sleeping on Kelly Oubre. And I think he's a good pivot off some of the popular plays in the price range. By the way, Steven Adams is now a game time decision. Keep that in mind. So Nerlens Noel would figure to see some extended work here, and he's very cheap. So Steven Adams, a game time decision. Fortunately, this is one of the 7 p.m. Eastern games, so we should get news.
Yeah. Also, it's a boost for Vooch if Adams sits.
Big time. Nerlens Noel is a good defender, but that should be taken lightly. Vooch is not a physical center, though. Nerlens is that's the type of guy he can defend. Nerlens can't defend the physical bigs. Like he just can't. He could never defend a Joel Embiid or some of these other bigger guys, but it's still an upgrade for Vooch, no matter how you cut it. Okay, let's close it out here. We'll turn it over to the live before lock crew. Lakers, Philly 7.5-point favorites, 229.5 total. I love Joel Embiid here. There isn't really much I need to say about it. I know you would expect us to spend more time on this game, but it might not be necessary because of how obvious some of these guys are. I think Rondo is a very strong play as well. He played 37 minutes his first game back, 42 the next game. I mean, if I'm getting that type of run, both of these teams over the last 30 days are playing at a top 3 pace, and I just don't know what there isn't to like. Michael Beasley with Kuzma out is another one. I don't even think Ingram's a crazy play, but he's not a priority. And then Jimmy Butler is popping up for me as well at $6,900 on DraftKings. Oh, Adam, and Ben Simmons in LA. Yeah, not a bad spot for him either. This is a game stack just dream right here.
Yeah, obviously the main three from Philadelphia, all great plays, like you said, really fast paced game. Lakers good defensively on a per possession basis, but the pace of this game shouldn't matter. On the other side, I think I like Ingram probably a little bit more than you do, but yeah. So I like Ingram. I like Rondo a lot.
Well, I like him. It's just that I like Rondo and Beasley on this team more than Ingram, but I still like Ingram. I
Yeah,
think
okay,
he's
that's fair.
a very strong player.
Yeah, so I'm with you. Obviously, Beasley a top value play here. Zubats is a really interesting tournament play. It's a scary, really scary spot. He's prone to foul trouble. He's going to be defending Embiid. There's a lot that can go wrong, but if we're going to get him at low ownership, he's certainly the kind of guy that if he does get 34, 35 minutes again, can absolutely break the slate at 5,600.
No question. No question. Yeah, there really isn't much to it. Before we head out, I'll ask you this. Jimmy Butler, because I think we need to ask this. How much Butler do you have right now? And do you think he's a better play on FanDuel or DraftKings? Definitely on FanDuel. DraftKings. He's 6,900.
Yeah, I haven't done DraftKings yet. He's a much better play on DraftKings. On FanDuel, it is not loading, so I'm not sure how much I have, but definitely a better play on DraftKings than FanDuel.
Right. And Josh, or actually it's Eddie and Chris coming up next, but they're going to take you up till 7 p.m. Thanks as always for hanging out with us and helping us grow the show. If you appreciate it, if you want to see more, hit us with a thumbs up, like the video. It does a whole lot for us. It really helps us out. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you always know when new content's dropping. Good luck tonight. For Adam and myself, we'll be back with you tomorrow on Wednesday's Deeper Dive.
There we go.